We finance black people specifically. And I think that we have to aggressively raise capital.
Oh, man.
Awufuna ngikhulume ngemali.
Sekukhulunywa ngawo sefuna ukubona
uyikhulume le.
Can I answer the
we finance black people. My shit. Emajiteni, welcome to the Ins podcast, ladies and gentlemen. It's your boy Purple Shepherd. Once again, 2026. Let's go. Anyway, today, Emajiteni has now ngihamba namauta ngipose emauthini. Danke siyabonga.
Danke
Emajiteni. Yizo lezo. Andile Ngobo. Ace Mahashule Shulex. Mesenot. Lele sasi ngathi liyaphasa. Oliver bazokungiqula ngalo kakhulu. Yabo ngithe ulinyayisa kancane kodwa ake ngisazi ngokwazi indlela za. Lo kwasemalokishini nasenakuphi. But sibuyile lesathu amajita sikhona kunyaka bethu esisanda ngena kuona. So yeah, majita.
Greetings, the Ins podcast. Jack Kalala in the building. First of his name, second to none, king to the wise, wise to the king. Hey.
Danke, wise.
Danke, wise, man. Danke, sazi. Ngisi wise.
Hey, good evening.
Kakhulu.
Eyasathoshi lava.
Danke, Emajiteni.
Danke mzala.
Danke mhlobo.
uTeddy wakanzama, also known as uTeddy we coffee.
No ponches.
Danke
Emajiteni. Welcome to the
Danke,
Ins
mhlobo.
podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Nkanyiso Nqome, your co-host. Let's start some out. Let's start some majita. Danke Shulex. I'm Mashide Shapir. Dana Satosh. Mashe kakhulu. Namhlanje mashe kakhulu.
Well, you guys know, man. Shout out to my artist, Boyd in 2026. Sanchez, Masvala 2025. That we want to bring nothing the best for you guys in the Ins podcast today. So I shall lose this. Who's the introducer? Today I lost this law. Hey, it's been myself for a long time, and almost like 10 years now. Manje uzegqoka amahetha amaningi, you know. So saza nakudala kerke Christian Center lapha. Locals uJesu lapha kwi-YCT manje sebembiza ngoChad wonke amagama now, you know. So I've known them for almost like 10 years now. Since we were like say Ntwala lapha Christian Center. Anyway, welcome to the Ins podcast.
Oh wow, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here.
Should I call you chair? No, man.
No, come on. We're not in that portfolio, guys. Aye.
Yeah. Introduce yourself to the folks, man.
So I think thanks for that intro. In fact, it was 2007. We were all together in what is that place called? The Market.
Yeah.
That dome that used to be then Brea. Alhambra Theatre, I think it was called. Yeah, so Alhambra. So that was 2007. I think that was about 18 years ago. Yeah. So we were in church together in a thing called YCT, Youth Coordinating Team. Yeah, I remember. Because I used to be in the education, in the poetry, in the drama. And I think then there was the general consensus. So guys, youth build us. Those of you who are still under 35,
poet to that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I remember that too. He was the main actor. He was I don't know if you know that evil character. An evil character called Haman. The one that wanted to kill all the Jews. He was that guy. that a young woman called Esther had to deal with him. And there was the Esther. I don't know. Yeah. So he needs an Esther, this one, but to neutralize him. So the Esther dealt with him in that portrayal. So it's a powerful rendition, actually, of society that we're in now. But at that time, in fact, it's a good reminder. So at that time, I was actually a student. And what I want to say is, at that time, the guys at church didn't know that I was on a journey. Because the time when they met me there, if you saw me then and what I was doing then, you would not have put the two together. So I used to be a poet. You know how poets look? I used to have a massive afro. I used to be hard earth, child, you know when you feel you're the closest to God because you have an afro. I don't have an afro anymore. But under this, I have an afro. Yeah. No offense to all the afro people. I used to have an afro. I still have an afro under all this, but every once in a while I stretch it. But I was on a journey, and at that time was one of the hardest times of my life because I had a huge problem. There was so much inequality, so much poverty. And yet I saw in the financial markets, because I studied economics from that time, and I did honors in economics, and I was like, there's so much money in the economy and in the financial system, but so many people are in poverty. I just couldn't understand, why is the money in the economy not being used to help us, as Black people in particular, with poverty? And so I actually resigned. I was working in the biggest asset management company that used to manage infrastructure assets. And at the time, I didn't understand why I was there. It actually, 20 years later, it made sense. But I resigned from that job, and then I went back to school. And so that's where I ended up in Durban, and I ended up being in youth because I was struggling to, understand my purpose, understand the current economic system and finance, understand what is my role. And so I think the biggest revelation for me at that time that led me to where I am now is that I was like, God, as a Christian, what is my role in solving these issues? The kind of Christianity I'm seeing is that people just want God for a car, they want to get married, they want money. I don't understand, because when I look in the Bible, all the people that are there, they liberated nations. It didn't seem to me that what I'm seeing in the real natural now and what was in the Word was coming together. So I think that journey began to stir in me to say, how can I be part and parcel of a solution? But I didn't know the problems I was bringing upon myself and the challenges that I would have to go through. But I think at that time, that's when I would say my life began. That year specifically was a pivotal point because it really shaped the direction that my life would take. So I believe that in all of our lives, there's like a one moment in time that you can go back to and say, what was that one decision that you made that literally changed the course of your life? For me, it was that time. I decided, and I would trust God, and I would leave what is expected, the norm, and I would go and pursue what is unknown. And lo and behold, there was a new program that Stellenbosch University developed, particularly the business school, and it was under the professorship of a guy called Professor Nicholas Biekba. And he created a program called Development Finance. And this didn't exist before. And he was the pioneer, really, to say, how can you use finance for development? And so I saw it in the paper. It happened at the time when I resigned from my work. And I was like, this is perfect. It speaks to development, to enterprise development, speaks to project finance, all these things that I didn't know much about. And I would now be further equipped to do something about the problems. And then the second aspect was that, but it would cost me a great deal to enter into that space. But in the interim, I personally was on a journey. And so at that time, I was led to Durban. I stayed with family. My parents were kind of like, our child, what is going on? Because she's in Durban writing poems and she's supposed to be work. They thought I'd gone, loonies. And I'm having the time of my life doing, Haman and dramas and all these things. And they're like, what is she eating? And I'm like, faith. And they're like, how? This one, we're also Christians, but we didn't do this. And I said, listen, this is my walk. And I was so grateful that they supported me, but it was a difficult time for the whole family. But I did have their support eventually.
Can you describe for our viewers the type of family that you come from? Because it's like Guinea Nonkanama Academy.
Yeah, so we grew up in the rural areas in Eastern Cape. My parents got married in the 80s, I think. And so all of us were born in the 80s, my siblings. My mom had 5 children, and we were all born within a very short space of time. Yesha was just having babies 1 year, the next. It's like 5 kids in like space of 7 or 8 years, a lot of children. But we really were, I think it's a pivotal thing that changed the course of our lives. I remember because my dad would always say, you will all have PhDs. He used to say this to us. And he used to say, you will all be billionaires. This is what my dad would say to us. He would just say this to us. And as a result, in our DNA, it's not, for us, it's not a thing. PhD is not something that is a foreign thing. So in my mind, as I was growing up, even when I was doing the master's, by the time I came here to Durban, I knew I have to do a PhD. It was kind of like in the back of my head. It's not something that is unachievable to me. But what the differentiating factor, I think my parents provided us support and they provided us love. So we grew up in a loving home. We were, I would say, your typical African family that grew up in the former Transkei, where one of the biggest, I would say, extinct breed that we are seeing in the new South Africa and the democratic South Africa is what I call black family. If you look in our neighborhoods, if you look in society generally, and you ask yourself, are we still having strong black families? Are we still having strong men in the society? Are we still having, particularly in this new generation, a culture where we build families? Because we grew up in that, and I think it produces a different type of society. Caring, supportive. I wouldn't say any family is perfect, but I think that the emotional security, the financial security that it affords both the children and particularly the mother. Because now in South Africa, what you're seeing is a scary statistic from Stats SA on the level of fatherlessness. And so you see a stat that talks to literally 34% of our families are in single mother-headed households, which means the majority, or 66 or 65%, are actually in single mother-headed households. They don't grow up with their fathers. And there's even more of a problem in black families. So I grew up in that type of environment where there was love, there was support, and my dad had a vision. He wanted us to be educated, and he wanted us to be financially independent. So he supported us in that by taking us to schools, by encouraging us to get educated, and he sacrificed a lot because he wasn't a rich man. He sacrificed, he forwent certain pleasures and victories in life for us as his children to get ahead. And he really put his life and he laid his life down, and we saw that as his children. And so we were very blessed, and he loved us. So I think that that support, that love, that vision that he had, and the support that my mom and him had together and they gave us. I think you asked about my family. So we 5. My other younger brother has a PhD.
Welcome, my siblings and a PhD.
And then my other brother is also almost done with his. It's almost done. But here's the thing. We resolve national problems. So he did his in education. The other one is doing it in a different space. But all of us are trying to look at what are the national problems that we can deal with using education as a tool rather than just getting certificates for the sake of it, but rather how do we use this education to actually develop our country further?
So then education is not bad after all if you're going to great lengths to try and solve these issues.
Education is not bad. Let me tell you why. Education changes the way you think. It reprograms the way you take critique. So someone who doesn't know how to handle critique is someone who's never gotten a fail in an essay. You don't know how to handle that type of critique that someone outside, it's not you they're attacking, is that they're saying you can do better here. You need to think differently here. You can improve here. I think when you look at the stats as well, though unemployment in South Africa is at 12.5 million and 3 million discouraged work seekers, the lowest portion of the population that's unemployed are those that have a post-matric qualification, i.e. you either have a 3-year degree or a 3-year diploma degree equivalent. that is the lowest portion that have lowest level of unemployment. The less education, and in particular those that didn't finish grade 12, they have the highest level of unemployment and the biggest concentration of those unemployed or those in the informal economy. So people that don't have necessarily a fixed income, income security is because of the inability to access education, but primarily also the type of education that different people have been offered because of the social class and because of the income that they were born into. So you're born into, I would say, these income deciles. Many people inherited the income deciles that they were born into. And it is a structural shift that requires you to move from level 1 to level 5, 5 to 8. It's not something that just happens. It requires a very definite shift, a different type of input, and a different type of individual that needs to get out of that. So I think that those are factors that influence issues of income security and unemployment. Let's get educated. Let's encourage our young people to get educated because firstly, it helps you broaden your thinking. It gives you more understanding of different things. It opens your mindset. But let's not end it there. Let's train our people to also take charge, enter into entrepreneurship, enter into developmental things. It's not enough to force everyone to be an entrepreneur. Not everyone's an entrepreneur. Some people are technicians. Some people are artists. Some people are artisans. Some people are doctors. We need all those different sectors to function in the society, but we need a lot more people who are willing to take risks and take sectors of the economy and become more productive. And for that, we need a lot more entrepreneurs. Even like mobile network, cell phone, whatever. All we see now is different races coming from outside to fix cell phones. Why can't our people be taught that in our localities, in our locations, is not a difficult skill? Why are our technical colleges not able to transition to say the ICT sector, we need to take it over, particularly that aspect of the value chain, instead of importing these skills? So the mindset for us has to be, let's create more people that are able to take risks, not only those who sit behind offices and desk jobs and those kind of things, but people that can enter into some of these spaces. But I think that the education system itself is what needs to be transformed to change our mindset. Because not everyone is going to be an academic. Not everyone's going to be a professional. You still need lawyers, advocates, nurses, scientists. You need those people to build, but you need more carpenters. You need more technicians. You need more plumbers. You need a lot more of those people. And those are entrepreneurs, right? Those are entrepreneurs. And those are jobs that particularly black men think are looked down upon because everyone is told go to university, go to get a diploma, a technical college is looked down on. And yet we've seen people build families from being plumbers. We've seen people build families from being artisans. And now the average artisan is a white 55-year-old male who's going to retire in 5 years. And that was 3 years ago, that stat. So we've got 2 years left. Who are going to be our artisans and our developers and the people that build economies and societies? Is the people that build, literally. The carpenters, the people that are boiler makers. And these are people that use their hands. And so they're entrepreneurs, but they have technical skills. So let's not be scared of getting our hands literally dirty. Because not everyone is supposed to be in the office behind a desk, behind a computer like you are sitting now. Some people are, and others, and many others should not be, because we have an economy to build. And this is the case for most of the continent. It's not just South Africa. So I think black societies have been dissuaded from this type of work. We've been engineered to think that this is below us. We lift up more these desk jobs, professional work, and we have a sense to say, no. My child will go to university. We applaud that. But if a child does technical work or wants to be an entrepreneur or wants to go a different route, we seem to have a kind of a need to be persuaded more in that line. And that is a social breeding, I would say, that has happened to us.
You are for education, and then you kind of push against it in some senses. So I'm not sure how much percentage to accredit to this, because to even respect some of these jobs or these titles. So if maybe we learned even from there, Uguti, umsebenzi. Like, where else can we then learn that? Apparently, kwalama societies like that's where. But it's okay.
No, I support education. I'm an academic, by the way. So one of my other caps that I wear is I teach economics, I teach statistics, and I teach courses called Economic Development Perspectives in Africa at the Stellenbosch Business School. I also teach a course called Perspectives on African Frontiers to MBAs in the business school. What am I teaching them? I'm showing them that Africans used to develop buildings. Some of the structures in Sudan, in Ethiopia, in West Africa, even in the Great Zimbabwe, different parts of the continent, are fundamental to how Africans were able to individually, before even colonization, self-develop. They had the engineering capacity that is now seen as only something like the Colosseum in Rome and the gladiators. You hear about gladiators in Rome. Do you know about the Great Zimbabwe in southern Rhodesia here in the southern part of Africa? It's still there. Do you know about the wall that was between now modern-day Mali, which was even longer than the Great Wall of China? You know about the Great Wall of China. You don't know about West African walls. Do you know about the paintings and the artwork that came from West Africa, Southern Africa? Do you know about the shipping that used to happen where gold was shipped from India, from the Horn of Africa, which is now modern-day Ethiopia, Sudan, in East Africa? Africans were able to ship ivory, copper, gold, even salt to Asia. This is before colonialism. And they had currencies to trade. So we talk about these things, and it's called Aksum. So if you research some of these things and you find out who was the richest man in the world, historically it's a man called... exactly, you know him. He's a black man, but we don't know about him. We'll talk about all the billionaires. Now, he's actually the richest man that's ever lived. Ever lived. Richer than all the Amazon, the Facebook, even the IT global billionaires, I'd say, right now. So you've got to teach our people this. So education is fundamental in training us and equipping us for the future that we need as Africans. But I'm saying, let's not underplay the value of technical education and the value of entrepreneurial education. And education shouldn't be a trap that says, go this way alone. Don't go this way. We should actually encourage our youth with the unemployment crisis we have to enter into TVET colleges. We should be strengthening our technical skills, very much so. The number of engineers, not only engineers, but develop artisanal skills. And I would argue African males need to be targeted specifically for these subsectors, like what they did in the time of Afrikaner. So they understood there was a systemic issue with the Afrikaner male. So what did they do? They established these SOEs, which is what we call now state-owned enterprises. And they said, let us, when we are building railways, we target white, unemployed Afrikaners. When we are dealing with Eskom supply and electricity, we target white male Afrikaners. We train them to do electricity. We train them to do railway. We train them to drive those trains. They must be able to be the participants and beneficiaries. And this is what we call public employment programs. So if we are going to deal with the fundamental structural problem of our economic outcome, education must go and resolve some of these systemic problems, but we've got to target where the hotspots are. And I would argue the education and the structural inequality that persists in our society, if we don't deliberately target the African male, and particularly the rural population, in particular women, black women, we will remain with some of the social and the inequality constraints that we see exacerbated. And there's a social result that causes a dysfunction in families, that causes anger in men, that causes high levels of, I would say, GBV or gender-based violence. I would say specifically violence against women and children. There's instability in families because men have unstable income. Do you know that stats and a lot of research has been shown to say that when men don't have financial independence, they're likely to have instability in the home, and even disputes rises. So marriages fail because of income insecurity. So it's no wonder that the issue of income security doesn't just affect our pockets. It affects our status in families. It affects the male psyche. It affects the outcome of society as a whole. And I think we mustn't extricate the social issues that we're seeing now from the breakdown of family, but also from the income insecurity that is as a result of the economic system that we have. And I don't think it's by chance. I think a lot of it is by probably the outcome of the apartheid design, but also the systemic design that we haven't been able to comprehend and necessarily deal with at a national level.
Maybe can I just take you back a little bit on the education one? I think we had a previous conversation here with the guys, and I was like, I won't send my kid. Like, I'm having a serious conversation with my wife because I don't believe in the education system, but I'm a big student of life. Like, I really love education. And my biggest frustration is on the quality of the education they give. I studied in the South African system, like from creche to matric. And I hate that I can give you facts about Hitler, but I don't know Africa. I don't know African history. I don't understand why African history is not taught in school. It's like, and then it got me to a point where I'm like, my kid is not going to school. Like, everything I want them to learn is about fundisa me. I will find a way to teach them the history that they should learn. So I want you to speak to people who have that mindset and maybe try to give us a channel we can take, because everyone says the education system is broken. The education is not teaching people the skills they need. We agree. I totally agree. And I really wish I could learn about the richest African man to ever exist, Escolid. Yes, like in school, not with my podcast. But yeah, like that's the question.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of the education now, so you're talking about homeschooling, effectively what you're saying. I don't know much about homeschooling. I'm in the system. So I'm in the system. I can't argue against the system in that I support taking kids to school, the formal system that we have. But I think that we as Africans need to change the system. So we are now in control. It's a democracy, isn't it? So why are we not liberating our people and teaching them economic history of Africa? That's up to us. It shouldn't be, and I always argue this, Shepherd, that why are we not... why are people, some of the facts that I teach in class, people at the MBA level didn't know. I show them stats there about, we know about the Gaza, the pyramids of Gaza, right? Of Giza, Gaza. We know about the pyramids, the ones in Egypt. And I laugh because I always say, how many of us have seen those, they call them the aliens, and some of those National Geographic programs, when you talk about the pyramids, they say, no, it was aliens, and you see those weird things. And then the reasoning around when Africans are at a level of engineering and capability that supersedes even Europe, ancient Europe, they began to contest. It's because of racism.
No, because even in different fields, even with science, I'm discoveries in they took all of them to be theirs, and
some
even if they could not justify it, then
so now what I'm saying is, why don't we rewrite the history?
Same as the issue of pyramids, they can't explain who did pyramids, but and how and what. They keep creating all these different stories.
But who is in control? How many African nations have democracy? How many African nations from 1960? Kwame Nkrumah was the first. Of those nations that were liberated to South Africa, which was the last in 1994, how many in their history curriculum teach about African discovery, things like paper, things like the feats that we have seen in terms of military feats? I'm going to take it here, Ushaka Zulu. The military feats that we've seen in the Zulu nation, for an example, the formation and the fight against the Afrikaners, why we have the military prowess that we had is because of a black African male that had no gun and had no technology that the Europeans had at the time, but it was able to contend with Afrikaners to the extent that they won different battles. It's because of military prowess. Why are we not teaching that? Who's responsible? We like to point at the colonial masters, but we now have democracies in our nation. And I want to take this argument to the economy even. We like to lament and say, economically, the colonial masters, history, this, that, and the rest, and we complain. But how many African nations, since gaining democracy, have rewritten the economic legacy and the economic footprint of their nations by taking rightful ownership of their mining, ensuring that they process their minerals instead of exporting them as fast as they can to the different nations that are willing to buy them at whatever price, and the market prices, and how many of us have reconfigured ownership structures so that we as Black Africans particular are able to penetrate these markets and we're not just price takers. And you ask yourself that question. We are now talking about Burkina Faso in 2025, last year, as the only nation, and maybe Botswana, that have redefined the economic footprint and taken ownership of their minerals. And it becomes a huge thing. But you have 54 African nations, including South Africa, by the way. And so you ask yourself, if we're going to rewrite the economic history of particular African nations, South Africa included, we have to rethink the economic model, the education model, the history, because many Black people have inferiority complex. I'll tell you what I mean by that. How many of you own clothing brands? Don't raise your hands. But if I was to ask you, where are those clothing brands from? Many of them, they are European brands. We look down on our local brands. We say they're less, whatever, I don't know. They're not, the brands that people will kill themselves for to get on Instagram is brands that are European owned. They don't even have shares in those companies. But if it's local brands, local companies that make things like what I'm wearing, many of us would say, no. And I'm not against international brands. I think buy them if you like them. But also buy local brands, right? So there need to be a balance. But that means that we need to stop looking at ourselves as inferior and unable to produce things and unable to develop things and unable to be at the helm of economic productivity. So I think for me, this goes to the heart of some of the issues that I think as Africans, we haven't been able to grapple with and deal with deliberately because they're not discussion points.
Then how do you like you seeing your rules and stuff? But Manje, the thing is, our people are being programmed. For so long, you are told that you're less. You're told, you guys have just said it now, with some of our history of people that were innovators, by talento, as if like Black people are not innovators. So now how do you make someone bet and believe that the clothing brand Black people are going to support it? Because once I call the clothing brand, abantu abamnyama ngebakusupport.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Vele siyatho vele.
Yeah. So now,
Sithi
like how do you make our people the importance of supporting especially local brands?
Can I ask something that's gonna you can sorry Shepard, because you touched on a point that we try to touch on this on our discussion Sisotola. The issue of the freedom that we got, that was kind of like it is not a true freedom, but in a manner to say, Yoguti, what are Black billionaires gonna look back and say, bonke labantu abakupower manje bazobuka emuva bathi benzini? Because we are going to complain ukuthi we have been colonized, as if only the African countries were colonized. Look at India. Yes, or you can even follow the oil as a South. The oil as a South was being mined by an American company. But at some point, we regain power. South yabuya yonke lo mali yangena ku government in Parisha abantu bakhona. But look at ama mineral resources as South Africa. They all, so we will cry and say we have been. I'm trying to understand that in a bigger scale. If then we win that battle and then we solve all these issues that we have.
So, Senate Democrats, what I'm hearing you say is this. Senate Democrats, and I also believe that this is what we've been sold as abantu abamnyama. Ukuthi masivoteni sifumane democracy and siwin ama-elections and now we have power. However, after we have these elections and we've won them, what you find is that abantu bethu basekwi-poverty. because they haven't dismantled the economic system. The economic system that was put in place from 1885 when Berlin decided to have a declaration to come to Africa, and all those European nations came and took our minerals and said we will become wealthy on the back of these African minerals. That economic model has not somewhat changed. Fundamentally, it's still the same. If you look at most African economies, their infrastructure is designed such that you take your minerals out of the earth. Who takes them out? It's usually foreign companies. Why? Because the mining concession and the mining rights are so high and they're so difficult to get. Even exploration rights, even for you as a local company to do that extraction, you need hundreds of millions of US dollars. So far, what you find is that the design, even of mining concession and mineral extraction, is designed for the elite. And mainly, if you want la mali and ukhuphe izinto semhlabeni, funeka upartnerishe nez international conglomerates. And usually the deal structure is not favorable to the local companies because you're not an expert and you can be tricked out of the wealth of that transaction, literally.
Hence, even naglente oil, because the government wale yena said, okay, we do not have the equipment. You guys have all this equipment.
Yes.
Give us a percentage.
Look at
and then they kept increasing the percentage till they were equipped enough to then empower abantu
for themselves.
And they have all the laws. They can make and change all the laws.
Yeah. So this is the point, is that your governments, so it goes back to your question, and I'm going to come back to Malusi's question. So your question is, this democracy and freedom that we have that doesn't yield economic liberation, I think for us is something we need to reverse. We cannot continue empowering political parties, in particular ones that don't reverse the economic models that look like what 1885 did to us. If there must be a demand on those in power to say, how are you reviewing the economic framework, the systems? How are you reviewing the sectors? There must be a partitioning of how we localize production, how we use some of our mineral, our coal, our platinum, our gold, locally beneficiate, locally develop, locally make products from the iron ore that is smelted here. So you'll find in South Africa 60 to 70% of some of these minerals used in the development of some of these processed goods, it comes from here, but it's not processed here. And kudala kukhulunywa ngento ekuthiwa beneficiation. But ayiyenziwe, and we don't have many black industrialists. So you've got to reconfigure the entire ecosystem, the DFIs, what we call development finance institutions, abo ITC, abo National Empowerment Fund, abo SIFA, all those entities, to empower people, because we don't have the capacity. We've never entered these sectors. So we've got to be skilled up, but we also have to be given products that are able to allow first-time entrance into the first-time entrance. So the requirement that banks have currently for us to enter, and I'm now going to the how. So the financing and the ecosystem of financing become critical. Yeah. Because if your requirement for me to enter into the market is I must have collateral, I don't have a house, I don't have any assets, I have nothing. My parents couldn't even go to school because they were prevented. I'm the first generation to just get out of, apartheid.
Even the
land assets.
The RDP that cannot subsidize.
Even if it's communal land. Yeah. So you can't even, there's no a title deed. Yeah. So we've got to reconfigure. And let's have this discussion to say what must be done. And this is what I'm saying, is that we've got to have the right discussions. And I'm excited to be here to talk about this, because the economic liberation requires us to question the current economic systems, but to provide solutions and proposals as to alternatives and to what should be done. And so one of the things that I've done in my own research is to say, if this is the problem we have, lack of capital, who can assist? Must we borrow money from Bretton Woods, IMF, World Bank, and all those institutions? My thesis was no. So I studied and looked at, eventually, when I did my PhD now, I said, no, I've worked in development. There's not enough money to finance development. And you're saying, how do we finance and support local entrepreneurs? Firstly, you don't have enough of them. You need to finance them. So you need to finance them by doing what? You need to provide cheap capital for them, but you also need to have state-backed capital, because this is what's going to develop new industries. And so we have portions of South Africa that were developed primarily on the back of industrialization of these new sectors. And Van der Beelpark is one of them, on the back of a man who designed apartheid and said, we've got to develop outside of the English, because there was, remember, in South Africa, you have the English, you have the Afrikaners, and then you have Africans that came into power. And so the only ones that never changed the economic system for their own people, it's us, post-94. And us, and my argument is, my thesis was, why don't we use pension funds? And this is a very topical thing, and people discuss it, and I argue to say, why can't we use pension funds to finance some of our industrialization, to finance SMME finance and development, and to finance national development, because it's going to be good for us. If we want to build African families, we've got to have economic security. Men need to be working. They need to be backed with finance. Women need to be working. They need to be backed with finance. Our families need income security. There's no society that can be built without that. And so we've got to navigate new solutions. And it's a difficult thing. How do Black people support Black people? We've got to stop hating each other. We've got to stop hating each other. We've got to pick up, use our income. Look at the retail system now. All of us buy food. All of us buy takeaways. All of us use a certain portion of our income for groceries. Have you ever looked specific to say, who is the Black poultry maker that I can finance? We could change an industry if Black people just did that, just on one product, meat. City no, so Kangela, a Black abattoir, and we create a network and a system and a directory for that. And then we say, let's go and buy from that Black abattoir. Let's go and buy from the butchers that are Black owned. Not because we don't like white owned, no, but because we are developing our own. Because we have the market power and the economic power. We can do that for clothing, but it requires a level of mindset shift among Black people. And this is now where we need to reform our minds. And so for me, I think that how do we do it is we've got to learn to love each other. That's the only way. And we've got to know and have a system where we know who are these Black entrepreneurs, where are they located. I must be able to say, if I want to buy local, who is where, who is selling what, and then I just go and buy and use a certain portion of my income. But now, nabantu betu bas disappoint because sometimes the level of quality service, you find that people run with people's money, all these stories. And so we've got to become ethical, we've got to become service-oriented, and we've got to become a professional in our provision of some of these services. And I'm not saying we're not, but I'm saying that let's try and detract from the stories that we generate because of poor service. Because any sector has poor service, whether it's white, Indian, or Black owned. But let's make sure that when we are provided a capital by people and they buy from us, we provide excellent service throughout. So I think that for me, these are some of the things that we can do these things. And I think we're seeing more and more of these transition, but I think we need to do it at scale.
Yeah.
At scale.
So I want to talk more about policy, and you just mentioned, Guti, one of the things that we find, especially if we're into these sectors, is policy. So the issue of policy in South Africa, we
policy as in, what do you mean?
Because you just mentioned right now, Guti, if you want to get into a certain sector, assets so that industry. So it's because of the policy that's been said to Ule industry, you only get in if you have this and that, excess amount of money. I'll make an example, like if you want to start a bank in South Africa, you need to have about 250 million.
Yes, that's true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's another issue that everyone else has been struggling with,
Can I add a point on that question? Because we were trying to start a bank, and it's a brutal process that lets you know that they don't want you to start a bank. And in SA, it's so bad that even when you try to create like a fintech product, like let's say you shift away from a bank, you still need a bank to support you. And then we try to reach out to the banks. Then there's this system where it's by invite only. Like, for example, for me to get African Bank to back me, African bank must invite me. But they won't invite me because I have nothing to show, because they're not backing me. Immediately you're in a circle where there's no way forward, there's no way backwards. And just to tag back on the exact same question is also this, back to the education and the voting and the power that we elusively have, right? You said something about changing the education system. Like, for me, the biggest question is, it's been 20 years, right? And even some of the people who went through the bad education system are sitting in parliament now. They're sitting in positions of power where they could shift these things. Like, why isn't the shift happening? Like, we can have this conversation for so long and say we actually can vote and have power. But the realization is that we've been saying the education system is broken. They went from NEC, they went to CAPS. They changed absolutely nothing. But they did that. And for me, it's like, okay, what are some avenues we can take? Because for me, the education one is a big one, because I know that once we get everyone, because this podcast, maybe 1,000, 20,000, 50,000 people watch it. But once we can indoctrinate people at a system level where they are learning these talking points that you are saying from school, that you must want your land, you must want to own production, you must want these things. It's very easy for them to shut down 50,000 people. But when 5 million people are saying, we want to own production, we want to own a piece of the pie, it's a different story. So that's like a thought to maybe let us try and explore how can we go out and actually address this education issue.
Yeah, it goes back to Malusi's question. It's a policy issue. And I don't know if we're disgruntled enough. That's the real issue. Because we like to have these discussions. We talk about it. I don't know how many summits I've attended, and there's panel discussions that sit like this. People discuss and lament and they complain. Different political parties will even lament on the issue. Look at what happened now last year. There was a proposal by one of the political parties that the 30% education pass rate is too low. It basically means that our people don't know 70%. It's something that is broken. It's not even talking about the quality of education, but it's saying, how can you pass at 30? They agreed to it, the majority of the parliament. What did South Africans do? Nothing. So what you're seeing is that there is a level of fatigue. People are just tired, I would say, and they've just almost given up hope. My argument is that we can never give up hope, because we are going to run. Where is South Africa going to run? The whole of Africa is coming south. Our country is going to jump into the sea because there's nowhere else to go. We need to ensure that we deal with these difficult issues. And I believe that it's a political question, but also it's a social question of how we've been engineered.
Because those that are quiet, they get being rewarded by, isn't this serious? Those who are supposed to talk, when they're quiet, they are rewarded. And those who try to be disgruntled, in force change, they die. How? Hence, we just keep talking like this. Not in a sense, not in a literal death. Not in a literal death. Like, okay. I think there is this thing that happens in South Africa where when people try to model Egbeni for us to go this in an actual sense, those who are walking this walk, they vanish.
You know what I think?
Yes.
Here's mine is more of a different. Yeah. So the solution that most people will say is, you need to change the political party, what. Yeah. I have a different perspective, because we've seen now, even with the different political parties, you would have thought that the structures now would change the economic model, because the outcomes of the current model are so poor. Growth is at 1%, unemployment at 12.5 million, unemployment at 42%, FDI is less than 18%, gross fixed capital formation is at the lowest level at around 13%. Every indice, whether you look at a PMI, maybe interest rates now are lower, inflation is probably the only metric that they use that you're able to reach the target. Inflation. But inflation, no one eats inflation. No one can buy with inflation. Income levels are constrained. Businesses are not productive. Worsening now is the tariff situation, the geopolitical situation that South Africa finds itself in, particularly because of its own doing. And so I'm asking myself, what South Africans need to do is at a grassroots and at a community level, schools, SGBs, at a grassroots level, churches, the local church, that's where the change must come. And it's not going to come because you yield your power to a political authority somewhere at a national assembly. I'm not saying that's not necessary, because that transformation is necessary. But you have got to go back to see, how did South Africa reform in 1994? It's 31 years, actually, not even 20, 31 years of democracy. It was because at a grassroots level, people took ownership. You had formation like the UDF. It's not spoken about a lot, but every structure and every society in a town, in a city, was able to say, we're fed up with apartheid, we're fed up with injustice, we're fed up. And they had meetings at a church level, at a school level. People were involved, not just in complaining, but also in rebuilding. So we've got to change the system to say, we're not giving our agency to the state to solve all the problems. We've got to start rebuilding. We've got to start rebuilding our society. We've got to start rebuilding our schools, not burn them. We've got to start rebuilding our own families.
But our people are still waiting on government.
This is
the
the
politicians.
Problem. This is the
They're
problem.
still waiting for government and politicians. And it's worse now, they're getting 350 per month. So they're not going to be disgruntled.
Let me piggyback that on that as well, because I think that's another key play that we need to consider is they were mass indoctrinated. That is already a real point to consider, that the people that you're dealing with were all told the same thing, that you have power, the government is going to solve your problem. Very loud, they were told that. And some of them got houses, they got benefits, they go to a hospital. Some of them, they're thinking, hey, it's way better than it was before.
And they are told that their vote counts.
Yes, so now they have this in their head where they're not thinking like we are thinking. They're not looking 50 years, 20 years. If I can eat today, I can eat tomorrow. That's the mindset of the person that is the majority. And then another thing, like this is just now opening brackets. I want your opinion on, do you believe South Africa was ready for democracy?
Okay, so let's go back to the first question, is because the question was what therefore need to be done around education and policy, was you were asking. So these things can be shifted. So let's go back to around late 90s. The South African education system, we used to have Bantustan, and then we used to have for white people, isn't it? And then what happened? Post-94, we scrapped Bantustan, but because of the legacy issue of education, you don't feel the outcomes now. So if you don't get educated and you don't finish matric, you're not going to feel the outcomes now. You're going to feel it 10, 15, 20 years later because of loss of future income that you cannot generate and loss of opportunities, right? So it's the same thing that happened in South Africa, is that unemployment worsened at a particular point. It wasn't immediately post-1994, but now we're feeling those effects because our black people at the peak of their productivity, the skills were not fully developed. And so you either have to import skills or you're not able to employ them. And so the few people that have these skills are paid 2 to 3 times the level because the supply is so low. So what you're finding is that it's the same now. So what we need to do to reconfigure that outcome is we've got to reconfigure our education system. What do? They changed the education system. We put in OBE, outcome-based. We removed what was working, but most of what we now call Model C, which was what the former model of Afrikaans or white schools, is where most what I'd call middle-class black people want to send their kids because the education there is superior. Why is it superior? Because I believe that if we can go back to that even now, it will help us. If we take our township schools, rural schools, every school, we put a field, rugby field, we put a soccer field, we put a library, we put a science lab. Now we need ICT, so we digitize. When I was in school, I was fortunate to do computer science. Can I ask you now, with AI and all this tech, how many of our schools now, 2025, have computer labs and even teach coding? I did Visual Basic at varsity. I did IS for a short while. I didn't like it. I quit. I did economics as a result. But imagine if I'd stayed in AI and IS, I'd be very rich now. I probably wouldn't be talking to anyone here. But I'm just being silly. But you understand the point I'm making is that if we don't change the school structure now, we are going to have the same problem in 30 years. So we've got to change the school system and make it work for our children by doing what Afrikaner, and that model works. It works. Let's put tennis courts, whatever, all these extra. Kids are not only going to be in science labs. Some are going to become sportsmen. Others are going to become scientists. Others will become IT, whatever. But there's a value in giving these children options. But if we build our schools like the apartheid model, what are we going to produce? So we've got to change and say we're not happy with these outcomes and put pressure on education outcomes and policy so that they are changed. I think the second aspect that you're asking on the outcomes and how we've got to fast track some of these is the pace of reform needs to be, I would say, consolidated. You talk about the Reserve Bank, you talk about 250 million needed for the reserve ratio if you're going to set up a bank. So I've always argued, and this is public domain, I've always said, if you remember what happened with COVID, all of us know we were locked in our homes. The government put together what they call a council. Who was the head of that council? Was the president. Every minister and all the MECs, premiers, they would be called by the president. They would have to account on every day. Do you remember what would happen on the TV? You'd see statistics on the number of people that have died, the number of people where's the COVID highest. This was systemically put in our heads. Now, why can we not do that for unemployment, for productivity, for us to track, are our tools effective if we are going to deal with unemployment? Where are the unemployment hotspots? Show those statistics every day on the TV. Why is the media not being used to educate the people? Like it was. We were educated about COVID. Why is there no council on the economy? And I'm talking not the existing ones because they're not changing outcomes, but councils where you call people to account and they all coordinate and gather to say, how can we build a working South Africa, a productive South Africa, a coordinated South Africa where all these institutions work together, even the private sector, even the banking sector, even the Reserve Bank, and all the authorities so that they can consolidate their efforts and lead to one joint outcome. Instead of everyone pulling at their own end, and then you end up with 1% growth. Other nations in the emerging markets have 4% growth. Others are hitting at around 6%. That's India. It was colonized. How did it get out? It didn't continue with the economic model that the English left it at the time, and they were able to redevelop and sustain. And now you see India at the forefront of ICT, BPO, and all these other sectors where we now outsource our ICT even to the Indians.
Too much.
Yeah.
Too much is outsourced there.
Yeah.
Too much. But doctor, let's say I'm here, or the 10 of us, right? Because I still genuinely believe if we could get your talking points in the education system, we have a fighting chance. But the probability for us to get that to happen it's no joke, because the enemy that we're going to fight, he hasn't even showed his head yet, because we're not even serious contenders. The people who really know what we want, what we're talking about here, once we get big enough, then you will see who will come to fight us. Right now, talk your talking points. Who's viewing you? Oh, just 1 million people, it's fine. But I'm saying, what's a strategy that will work that 1,000 people hear you? 1,000 people say, okay, the directions from the doctor is clear. This is how I approach this. For one, I can say, for example, you could tell us, each of you guys in your homes, be a present dad, because what we are fighting, you see, I can take that and go with that. But anything else, I'm not going to parliament, go Shinjani education system.
Yeah. What practically can you do?
We do. The person watching this video, and I know that they're all going to feel this feeling we're feeling now. We hear this issue and say, born, but
Genzen
mina. Now, I start moving in that direction so that by the time Sibasha and Nati, they didn't see us coming. But in the cool. How did they get to this level where they could do this to us? It's a challenging one, but even if we don't get it today, I really wish to know, because I want to know how I can defeat this master that has been planning for hundreds of years, has beaten my grandparents, beaten my fathers, and now he's even beating me.
Yeah.
Nah, no ways.
That's a tough one, eh?
No way.
I don't know. I don't want to act like I have a solution to...
But you've done a proper research on this, and you wrote this.
You the
so-
best hope,
Okay,
man. Joba,
okay.
man.
You're our hope right now.
Let me say this personally. So what I did, what I did. So I did research. There is. I will share it. Maybe you guys can put a link in your thing on the reading. So there's a research that I did called "New Wine into New Wine Skin," and the research recommends what needs to be done in terms of policy, and it has 7 pillars. And these are policy pillars, but also I think at an individual level, they can be done. So the fundamental one is I talk to the issue of we've got to industrialize. We've got to industrialize. We've got to become a people that want to be more productive. And how does that affect me personally? And how does that affect Umalus personally and anyone in this room personally? What it means is this, is that you have to identify personally now, what is the area in which I can support this thing called industrialization? It differs from everyone. I'm holding here a glass with cranberry juice. Can you make juice? Do you have an interest in making juice? I don't know. Maybe you do, maybe you do not. You have nothing to do with the food sector. I've got some videos that I've shared about agriculture. I'm not so strong in my social media because I'm so busy with other stuff. But I'm trying to now educate people on saying we've got to look at what can you do personally to industrialize. You've got all this equipment here. Most of it is imported from China or from Korea or from some of the Asian countries because they've got the technology. So the question you must ask yourself is there space for me in the value chain of the areas that I'm interested in and I'm actually in any of the areas? So there's a value chain in every sector. So even if it's agriculture, maybe you don't want to be the farmer, maybe you don't want to be the one who makes the juice and presses the grapes or the berries into the juice. Maybe you want to distribute it. Maybe you want to sell it. Maybe you want to market a brand. I don't know, but we've got to begin to organize ourselves and find what is it. It doesn't happen by chance. It never happens by chance. Industries in Asia were created from what we call amafongkong. But they've perfected the art of amafongkong. You're buying their cars. You're buying their technology. You're importing their skills. But because they set in their hearts to do reverse engineering, to teach their people what to do about these. So you do need a policy tool to help people get into school, encourage them into these sectors. But you also need a people that decide, I want to have an interest in this. I have a desire to equip myself in this. And then I'm now in one of the empowerment funds. We finance Black people specifically. And I think that we have to aggressively raise capital. Can I answer?
We finance Black people. Mashi.
Okay. So, and I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but I'm saying that more needs to be done to make sure that entrepreneurs and people that want to get into the value chains, so you yourself must identify yourself as someone who can solve a problem. And you've got to identify personally, where do I fit? Even if you make a toothpick, even if you make a serviette, even if you make a mat, I don't know where you fit. Plants, I don't care. Landscaping, do something. But do something that you can generate income and also do something that you have full power over, right? And you can develop that skill. The second aspect I would say is I asked the question, many of us, it goes to the finance issue. You now need capital. You've got this idea, where do I get finance? And we know that there's a conundrum where the supply of finance is not meeting the demand. And so many people have stories about, I've gone to DFIs, NEF, IDC, and CFA, and maybe Province. And abang nik.
And phone malap.
In the banks. So the government needs to go back to itself and say, we have not successfully solved this problem and accept it. And so I'm not here in my other capacity, so I can't speak officially in that capacity. Maybe you can call us formally in that other capacity.
Ask me for audited financial statements, Gee, startup.
But we need, and these are serious constraints, because if you're a startup and you're being asked for all these information, it becomes a hindrance. It becomes a complexity that enables you it inhibits you rather from actually doing what you want to do. So we need to support entrepreneurs without being so compliance driven. And so we're trying to loosen these things, but capital becomes key. Economy, and you don't make finance available to SMMEs. And we've seen that in banking sector yetu. Banking sector, I've lamented the banking sector. I don't want to have my bank account closed because bane powers labantu. But I've said that, and there's a discussion I had at the Competition Commission last year, and I was saying that there's a serious crisis. If sizawutshintsha economic model, you've got to touch on the financial system. If asiyenzi londo as Africans, sisakhuluma nje, we're playing. So this is where I'm talking to Africans now to say, so that's why I had to do my PhD to say, what can we do with the financial system? My solution, one of them is pension funds, which are government in the main. The biggest pension fund is the government employee pension fund. We're not saying, and I want to emphasize, we're not saying take pensions, don't account for how you use them, and just use them to give them to government. No. What the argument is and how you use pension funds for development is you look at what other countries have done, and you see that Spain, Canada, Australia, even the US, many developed nations have pension funds that they use for unlisted, for also your national development, for SOEs, even for enterprise development. But you securitize, you package bonds, you package instruments that are cash flow generating, and you repay the money. So you structure, very technical financial modeling is done on each transaction, and you need usually technical people that are able to assist you in doing these things. But you need a willing government, and you need a willing trustee and an agency, I would say a pension fund that can partner. And this is done across the globe.
Yeah.
But what did South Africa do? Come 1994, Amabulu, Ayesaka, they built EXCOM using pension fund. They built Randwater using pension fund. They built some of the provincial board using pension fund. What happened in 1994? They said no more. And they used to force prescribed assets, which is a portion of the pension fund was used for national development. It used to be forced. But the national development used to only benefit the white people because there was apartheid. So all the infrastructure you find in Cape Town, the infrastructure you see in Johannesburg and Bloemfontein, all these metros now, it's not because they are more clever than us and whatever. It was by design. So for you to now level the playing field, even Durban, everywhere else outside of these urban areas and economic nodes, you've got to deliberately develop, because not everyone wants to live in these cities. And you have an urban planning crisis because there's not enough housing, there's not enough economic opportunity. And so you've got to now say, how do we deliberately require reforms around those? So I want to go back. Personally, you find yourself as a solution, see where you can fit, do what you can, look for instruments. The government has a role to play in the financial system overhaul entirely. And I think thirdly, the individual. We've got to have families, I believe. Families are key in this thing. Families need to deal with this structurally. And I look at the Nehemiah model. When Nehemiah went to rebuild, Nehemiah is a book in the Bible, but he was an agent that solved a national problem that had never been solved for many years. And so he said, you know what? What can we do? He got the idea. One family went and solved this part of the problem. Another family went and solved this. It was building a wall. But one family would do the door, another one would do the bolts, another one would do. So every family, and that's why families are critical. You can't do this thing on your own. You've got to have support. You've got to have a family type of a structure that enables the facilitation of this. And I think the emotional support, because it's psychological. Some days are hard. Some days there's challenges here. You need support. And that's where families become critical. And then you pass it to the next generation. You see how they do it with the Jews. You see how they do it with the Indians. Why can't we do it? It's because our families are broken down. Generational wealth doesn't pass from one level to the next. In fact, what you find, the one generation will build so much, but the children are not interested. But you'll never find that in other generations. They'll continue the family line and because they were trained. We almost allow our children to do whatever they want. They have a choice in the matter. And so there's a systemic issue in the construction of black families that has to be reversed, because if we're to build generational wealth, your son and your daughters have to agree to the vision that the father has, isn't it? Or the mother in this case, because you have a third of them living alone without fathers. So at least your child must be in agreement to say, okay, we're going to enter into this field. You will then take on from your parent. Do we have that type of systemic thinking? So my answer to your question would be, at least whatever it is you build, pass it on to your children. Pass on that inheritance to their children. Teach them the value of what you're building. Put them in the business at a young age. Make them work in that sector. Teach them that you're passing this on to them. It's theirs. You're building it for them. You're not going to sell it somewhere, you know? So these, I think, are some of the things that people can do personally. But many of us don't come from families of business, or you'll be the first generation to do this. So it is a mighty task. But I think that nations have shown that in one generation, it can be done. And we've seen it with China. We've seen it in 30, 40 years. They've taken 400 million people out of poverty. And so global poverty has gone down and been reduced primarily because of the model they had of different rural reform, the different model of economic reform, but also of a developmental state. Developmental banks were used to finance the ecosystem and all those things. So I think that it can be done, but we've got to have the will. And I think it must start at a local level, at a grassroots level, and at a family level. Let's rebuild our families. Let's have vision for our families. Let's revive our families. And I think that it's got to be a focus of all the social structures to rebuild our families, to rebuild men in our society, but also to rebuild the economic vision of our families, because every family should have an economic vision.
You work also with NEF, and you guys fund black businesses. And since like last year, so what's your view on that one?
On the fact that they've gone on an international campaign. I'm scared now because Venezuela has happened. And military. Next thing. I know. I'm pro-BE. I'm pro-transformation. I'm pro-redress. And let's look at what is transformation and what is black triple BE, which is black economic empowerment, which is now broad-based. The triple BE comes from that. It has 5 key aspects. It's not just about enriching the elite. What we saw in the early 90s, particularly post the 1994, is that there were a handful of people that benefited from these equity transactions where you are given a stake in a company which you didn't build. And this was to deal with redress, and this was also to deal with transformation and to make the society look like the people in South Africa in terms of economic empowerment. Now, what broad-based black economic empowerment sought to do was to say economic empowerment doesn't belong to 5 or 1% of the elite. It should be the majority of African households. It should be the majority of communities. And furthermore, it should be enterprise supplier development, which means that we need to ensure that black business enter into the mainstream economy in all sectors. You want to become suppliers, but also utilized in every subsector of the economy. So you have these charters across the different sectors, targets for these, whether it's transport, financial services, agriculture, and so forth, marketing, where you want to see black players in these subsectors. So primarily what you want to see is redress, where the population and the majority of the people in the population are economically participating in the ownership and in the productive side and in the value chains. How can this be something that is opposed? Or to oppose for me BE is to say we're opposing black people participating in the economic productive process. We can argue to say it's not good enough to have 1% an elite. Yeah. And I agree with that. It shouldn't be that an elite that is politically connected are the beneficiaries of economic access because of how close they are to power. Everyone should be given the same access and the same opportunity to gain access to this productive resources and assets. So I think for me, I am very much for a production process and a reform economic model that sees the population of South Africa and those economically empowered look like the majority, which is black people. We're not yet owners of industry. We're not yet owners of capital. We can't access sufficient capital to develop ourselves. And I think that until we are able to see reproductive assets owned by Black people, and this become, I think, put in our heads so that it's not an abnormality, but it's a norm.
Yeah.
I think we're not there. So for me, when I talk about BEE and economic empowerment, a lot of the time the misinformation is saying it's corruption. BEE and corruption not the same thing. Corruption is corruption. We saw Steinhoff. Was that BEE? They were given assets by PIC. They lost hundreds of millions in the European markets under fraud, mismanagement. That was corruption. Is it BEE? No, it's just corruption. Similar, you have Black people that are corrupt. Similar, you have Indian people that are corrupt. Why is it when corruption is happening, we equate it to BE? For me, it's a conundrum. It's a misinformation that has continued. And even our people, they equate corruption to BE. It says to you that the narrative has changed so much that we ourselves are engineered to be the very opposition to our own development. We are the ones who now begin to say, no, let's not develop ourselves. Where have you ever heard of such a thing? No, let's not be economic owners of capital and be the ones at the forefront of development. So we've got to rephrase, let's call corruption corruption. Whether it's done by South African, whether it's done by white households, Afrikaans, it's corruption. And we must deal with it as such. Let's call mismanagement. But let's not say, many nations have local participation and equivalent programs that drive local transformation. In South America, you have them. In Asia, you have them. And they guard very definitively interests of local participation to the extent that local industries that we think in South Africa, anyone can be a hairdresser, for an example. Anyone can be a barber. Anyone can, informal enterprises that we see even as Lokshin. Abantu bangena, amaspaza shop now. If you go to Ghana, if you go to many of the African countries and you're non-local, you cannot do that. Only it's reserved for locals. Only locals can do those jobs. They have job reservation for locals, even in Europe. But if South Africa dare to say, why is it? We used to have local hairdressers. Can you tell me now, in any of the cities, the majority of a basic thing like a hairdresser is not a South African? And it's not to say let's exclude. It's to say in some areas where the skills entry level is low and the competition is low and you still have issues of economic participation, the level of unemployment that you have, it creates social issues. It creates social lack of social cohesion. So the opposite of social cohesion leads to anger, frustration. It leads to competition between individuals. And so it needs to be dealt with if we're going to resolve some of these issues. So I think that for me, we have got to stop being the engineers against our own development as Black people. Even if something is mismanaged, let's call it for what it is. Corruption is corruption. But let's not say, let's throw out BE. But if we want to reconfigure some of the tools and the way in which BE is shaped because of the outcome, let's reshape it. Let's reconfigure the instruments. If we want to change the scorecard elements, it's very technical. They have these agencies that verify whether you're level 1 to level 5. You can be level 1 but have no Black ownership. So you're asking yourself, do we need to reconfigure some of these things? And this is the discussion that needs to be had to say, if we're serious about transformation, let's reconfigure these things so that we actually see Black people owning factories and running these factories, but we've got to capacitate them, enable them, and create an environment that enables them from a schooling level to the outcome of school. So going back to what can be done, read that New Wine into New Wineskin strategy. There's a summary, I think it's about 23 pages. Hey, I haven't read that thing in a while. And then there's a long report that's 123 pages. So it's got about different sections. We argue theoretically, fundamentally why neoliberalism is a problem. Ideologically, most nations that have succeeded have moved away from what South Africa is still inundated with, which is this neoliberal economic ideology and framework that says that you are dependent on the markets. And there's structural flaws with the markets that cannot be responded to unless the state intervenes. But you need a functional state. The second aspect of that report looks at what are the problems. And so I look at all the economic stats. I look at the unemployment, FDI, the different sectors, the contribution of sectors from a statistical perspective to show that after 30 years, we haven't really moved the needle. We haven't really moved the needle. In fact, things are worsening. Even per capita GDP is worsening. Things are where we were in 1997 and all these statistics that are really very depressing. The third aspect, look at what therefore must be done. And that is, for me, the most exciting aspect of that report. So I break down into 7 chapters, 7 pillars, what must be done. And in the next chapter, econometrically, we use a model that estimates if we do these things, what is the outcome? And how does unemployment, poverty, growth get affected? And we argue that unemployment can be moved to 12%. Poverty can be halved. We measure the impact of investing in manufacturing and growth in education outcomes and all this, and how that affects, the end goal. So it's a very long report, but read the summary. And I think make available the summary to the podcasters so that they can read for themselves. But let's read. Let's read.
Mashit. Well,
Thank you.
ngenxa yesikhathi isisimashele bese qhubeka so phinde sibone uthini Razo.
ngisho bona ukuthi hayi dokotela kusamela kuwo
awuzobuye beseyisama intro
hayi intro nesama ngeke
Isumele walalo maqasho.
ngiloko ngisho impela ukuthi ngase kucisha namalazi singakajijeli anything mama
Isithule lapha.
kubi kumele ubuye ma
Anyway, Job Usuzwile. I think I'm actually again, but thank you so much for your time and your insight. I hope our viewers got something today, and also Kuninga Sikfundile, and still have a long way to go. And we know very well that our country, my challenges are money, and if sakona abantu abafana nani who are fighting and want to see change, especially kubantu abamnyama in South Africa. Ithembas now, because now we are also playing our part here with podcast, and now corner up in government because labantu yahlala nabo fethu, and ngikubuze mina now and again ukuthi kahle bathini abantu, I mean, I don't know how many times we have said to Cyril ngithi ukumbuza vele lomshithi ukuthi wenza and then we've had conversation with them, so siyabonga ukuthi ufike la, and then uzobamela and I hope our viewers got something today. So thank you so much, and I hope you're going to come back and become part of the family now. Be a friend of the show.
Thank you for having me. No, it was good to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I hope it was educational.
Asibonga sifunde kakhulu. Ingakho bezikiyeka nje uyimashela. Danke siyabonga.
Danke.
Thank you, guys.